Hey, this is Brian Stillman here at CES 2020 in Las Vegas, Nevada, Las Vegas Convention Center. I'm here with Joanne Pransky. I'm here with Tom from Tombot. I'm here with Jenny from Tombot. We're here to discuss robots. We're here to discuss robotics. We're here to discuss the way that they interact with people. It really is some future tech, but we're here, we're living it. And we've reached a point where I think it's becoming more and more difficult to talk about robots as something outside of people's lives on a very personal level. It's not just industry, it's not just tools. They're really something that we live with and that have become part of our lives. Joanne, you are a robot psychologist. I think there's a lot there that we're going to want to unpack and discuss. Let's start with, what does that mean to be a robot psychologist?
Well, actually, I'm the world's first robotic psychiatrist.
A psychiatrist, I'm sorry.
I was hoping to get paid more money by upping my career to psychiatry versus psychology. And I billed myself this in 1986, I say, at a time when people would say, oh, you mean the new Jane Fonda workout? And I'd say, no, not aerobics, robotics. So I was really ahead of my time quite a bit. And I brought to life a character called Dr. Susan Calvin by Isaac Asimov, who dubbed me the real-life Susan Calvin in 1989.
She was from the iRobot series of books.
She was from the iRobot, and he actually was the first to really write about robots being used for good as an example. You know, Tombot and Jenny is a robot that's being used for good. But my goal was to, being so far ahead of my time, I always said I'll be no more post-singularity or posthumously, was to make people aware of robotic development so that they could accept it. Again, this was really early on, starting 30 years ago. And my mission was to bring them onto national television and film, just like animals, because the more you see, the more you're going to learn. So I pitched stupid robot tricks or smart robot tricks to Letterman, and in the meantime, I completely engrossed myself in the robotics industry to learn more from a sales, marketing, and business perspective. So I sold industrial robots for 10 years. I was the co-founder of the first medical robotics journal, but my passion has always been to have robots, sitting in a waiting room, and I've been adopting clients, but now they're just about to start to talk back to me and share with them the problems of what it's like to be integrated and live and work among human beings.
You know, robots have always been a sort of mirror for man's fears about science, man's fears about moving forward. You look at Metropolis back in the 20s, you look at Gort from Day the Earth Stood Still, or Forbidden Planet, Robbie the Robot from Forbidden Planet. Robots were always imposing, but what you're trying to do is expose people to the idea of robotics as something part of their lives, something positive in their lives. Why was that so important?
Well, it's so important because technology is always being used to improve our lives. I mean, this is whether you call it a robot or a device or a computer. I mean, I use the analogy like when 2001: Space Odyssey came out in 1968, over 50 years ago, right? Computers are going to take over, computers are going to kill us, computers are going to be evil, and that did not happen. Computers became a part of our lives. We are completely dependent. We cannot function without computers. So now if you add a little bit more mobility, a little bit more physical embodiment, you will have robots that help to improve our lives as well, okay? So robots particularly fill voids where there aren't human beings, and I mean, everything from loneliness being a worldwide epidemic. We're speaking more to our devices, so robots really are designed to help us in our lives. And back to science fiction and the media, there's been a lot of negative depictions, but think about how many roboticists were inspired by Isaac Asimov and the good robots, and the great robots, and Star Trek, and Data, and R2-D2. I mean, some of the companies iRobot, was founded because they wanted to really build a robot that helps us in our lives.
Now, Tom, that's what you've done with Jenny. When you developed Jenny, when you started on this process, were you aware that robots are also sometimes things that people are nervous about? That things, do I want to let something like this into my house? How do I want this? Not that anyone expects the robots to suddenly rise up and we're not going to get a Terminator scenario, but will this be something that my mother or that the elderly person in my house can connect with? It's this cold machine. Was that something that you were thinking about and aware of and having to work past?
You called this a cold machine?
No, I'm saying that was people's concerns.
And it's a great question. When we started this journey, we didn't know what the finished product should look like. And we dealt with things like hard plastic exteriors. Mm-hmm. We knew we didn't want it to be metal because the cold metal would never be something that people wanted to touch. But we wanted to have something that really inspired them to physically connect, verbally, emotionally, but physically connect with the robot and the fur was really the key. And so the more lifelike it got, the less intimidating, less daunting it became, and so more like a household pet than a robot overlord.
We talked earlier about the uncanny valley, this idea as you get closer and closer to humans, it becomes a little bit creepier until you finally hit exactly the same as humans. Joanne, what do you think of the idea of using a dog, a sort of canine form, as a way to help people embrace the idea of robotics and become comfortable with robotics, going at it from something like that?
Well, I think there's both form and function in robotics, right? I don't need my vacuum cleaner to look like anything, right? I do want to hear it so I know if it's stuck somewhere and I don't want to trip over it, right? But when you take a robotic pet, and actually this is really a medical device because it's being used for elderly with dementia, and they've done a lot of clinical research and studies, and so that becomes a natural accepting way, especially for humans that can't be with biological pets, right? So it depends upon what the use of the robot is. And this is used because people with dementia happen, instead of like parallel play, as Tom has pointed out, where they're just existing in a reclining chair, petting, now it might be a source of a common communication between humans. I mean, that's a goal of robotics, right? To improve that. But back to your point about, what it looks like in the uncanny valley. Well, I just think it's inevitable that there will be a time, right, when I'm having a conversation. If I want my robotic assistant, I want it to have eyes, and I want it to be able. I know that best. I want it to respond to me. If I want the best teacher in the world, well, I'm probably going to look like the best teacher I ever had. Right, and if we're all having a digital imprint and copies of ourselves through everything we do, through email and video from the time a child is born, and I give you an emoticon or an emoji or a meme that looks just like me, we're already starting our digital representations. Well, why wouldn't I want to have for my great-grandchildren, right? Maybe not my children, they'd probably freak out about that, but why not have for my great-grandchildren, my grandchildren, like a replica of yourself, right, in a digital version? Wouldn't that make sense? I mean, that's what we do now. So this is, to me, maybe it's a little uncanny and maybe it's a little scary and freaky at this time, but this is, to me, is the inevitability of where we're going with technology.
Now you started working
companions, robotic companions. Right. This is a robotic companion, but it's perfect as a pet. Perfect.
You started working on pushing the idea of acceptance of robotics, making people comfortable 30 or so years ago.
Right.
We're reaching a point now where we have something like Jenny. Is it the time frame you imagined? Is it the time frame that you expected in terms of reaching a point where the technology was there to become something that would be so easy to accept?
Actually, I think I've always known the evolution, but my time frame has always been off. So if you asked me in '86, I would have said, oh yeah, we'll have a robot in the home like Rosie the Jetsons in the year 2000. So I've actually always been off. And even if you'd asked me in 2020, if I was giving a panel, which I did today, and there were only 3 robots, I expected every single one of us to have a smartphone. I expect every single one of us to have a robotic assistant with us, right? To carry our stuff and to be doing, our posting and to helping, and maybe for me, even as helping me walk at that point, or an exoskeleton. But so I think the evolution I've always been accurate about. My time frame has been very off. But it's the awareness, and when I say awareness, it's to understand more, not what you read in headlines, but more about the exact work that roboticists have done and are doing. What is Jenny? What does she do? What does she not do? Why was she designed that way? What are some, experiences? So, but when you see her in a video like you do now, well, she's a robot. She's a medical device, right? So you've learned something new that's helped to accept.
Well, and that's something I wanted to ask you, Tom. In terms of iterations on Jenny, moving forward, as you discover what's working, what's giving people the most benefit, what they're most accepting of, how do you see Jenny evolving as you move forward?
Great question. So what we've tapped into, we believe, is that realism is really the key for acceptance. One of the questions that Joanne posed to a panel earlier today was, what's it going to take for people to embrace robots in the home, for example, in elderly care? Well, people can relate to things that are very realistic. It's something that they're familiar with from earlier in their life, and so we want to continue to expand the level of realism that we're able to establish here with the robot. For example, as we expand the kinds of movements that she's able to do and make sure that she's able to do that authentically. We don't want her in the future to walk like a robot dog. We want her to walk like a dog. And so even though the Sony Aibo is a wonderful device, it's not confused with anything other than a robot. We want her to be as authentic to a real animal as we can possibly make her.
And I just want to add that, this is some of the issues that a robotic psychiatrist really focuses. Never the robots I'm worried about. It's not the robot operating system. It's always been what I've coined as HOS, the human operating system, meaning that we humans either use technology beneficially or not. And I've always been very concerned about the indirect communication between humans, and I am even more concerned about the upcoming generations. It's one thing to understand if you have dementia and you can't tell between reality and non-reality, and that's of course understandable, and you don't need to, but when you're a child and you're spending more time on virtual reality and augmented reality and in your devices and communicating digitally and not having, I've always said a job of the future is going to be face-to-face, human specialist wanted 40 hours of face-to-face, human time. So when this reality blurs, right? When people, I read about someone who's wants to marry their hologram. I will expect a robotic psychiatrist to be able to treat a robot and says, no, really, he's not very nice to me. He's really abusing me, but these are all ethics and issues that I've been talking about, and they're becoming more and more prevalent.
Is that an inevitability? We talked earlier, you and I were talking about the idea that people are communicating digitally. We're interacting in a digital way that is perfectly natural, especially for people growing up on it. We're going to reach a point where mechanical animals are going to feel more and more comfortable. Later generations are going to see them as normal, as every day. Is that a good or a bad thing? You're talking about your earlier work was making people comfortable with robotics. Yes. Is it possible to become too comfortable with it where there is a danger that we're losing the human interaction?
Well, there's always that. There is always a danger, but the fact that
I think it sounds great.
Well, it sounds great to me
cool.
too, and that's what I'm saying. That because I think one of the barriers for robotics not having achieved being in the home, of course, there's technological barriers, but
sure.
I think the primary is the acceptance, right? Is because the negative connotations that people have of robotics. But upcoming generations, like, why wouldn't they have a robotic companion? And like I call them first responders in the mental health world, right? We don't have enough doctors to meet the needs of people. We don't have, people who are suicidal. Well, there are apps and there are robots for that. And to help us in our behavioral mental health.
Right.
Because we don't have enough humans to fill that. So it's great that you'd feel comfortable talking to, I think, a robotic device or a robotic, medical device as a pet, as a therapeutic tool. So I think there are a million benefits to it. And again, it's up to that user or parents of young children to be able to teach them the difference between what is real and what is not real and how to use a robot properly. I joke that it's the robot I'm going to have to analyze when it's abused, but really, just like a child, in child therapy, right, it's the parent. Or if in pet therapy, it's really the owner, right, that you're bringing in for behavior modification. So it is my goal and my wish that we humans focus on using robotic technology to benefit us, to improve the longevity and quality of our lives. But there's already a lot of abuse, right? People hacking.
Right.
What's a lot of that? That's a human problem.
So moving forward, question for both of you. What are the next steps to acceptance of robots in human lives, integration of robots into human lives? I guess sort of the next, that sort of continuous step of what you started 30 plus years ago, what we've got with Jenny. What comes next?
Well, I like Jenny as an example because when you say in our lives, of course, it has to be affordable, right? It can't. Not everyone can afford a $50,000 house robot. Sure. So I love that because Jenny and Tombots are affordable. They're solving a problem, and they're doing their research. and they're doing it right. And you don't just you don't take technology and go, that seems like a great application. Robotics is a very long-term effort. I always say there's 3 things I've learned in life to have patience on: robotics, marriage, and children. Don't ask me what day is what. But robotics is a very long-term. It's very, very difficult. And when you have a success, right? Like, no one questions a surgical robot if it's going to save a life, right? If it can get into a tiny newborn heart, right? No one questions that. But when they ignorantly say, well, that robot took my job, instead of really understanding that, no, that's created 3 downstream jobs. So that's how I think. You have to start with good successes and promote them, and what is a robot is a whole different discussion. I mean, in South Africa, they call it traffic like a robot. So if you said to someone, do you have a robot? Oh, yeah, I have millions of them in our country. So you have to define what is a robot and whatnot. And I just think this is a perfect case of a use of where robots are really aiding and people's lives where there is nothing else to do that.
Tom?
I agree 100%. I'm optimistic that we will never see a robot revolution, but rather a robot evolution, and that we'll see them come in slowly, and we will adapt as the change comes into our lives. Kind of like how word processing people, typewriting pools went away for the because of the word processing program, and certain jobs now that are automated that have gone away, like the cotton gin and others, that the evolution of technology will be at a pace in which people can adapt to it faster. And so we'll make room for these as interesting and thoughtful products come to the market. I get a kick out of social media losing their minds over videos for the Boston Dynamics Spot Mini, because that is so dramatically different than people are used to, but it's also something that won't come into society very quickly. It will come in an industrial capacity, and people will see it's useful, and then if they're successful, it will expand from there. So I really don't think that this is a big challenge that we're facing. I think the fear of a rapid change isn't realistic as it relates to consumer robotics.
Probably, but I would just like to add that in general, I believe that robotic technology will learn from us as humans, like children learn from us, right? So if we teach them good things, they'll learn good things. If I teach them to go steal from next door, then they may steal from next door. And so ideally, yes, it is a robot evolution. Ideally, I hope that it is used in a very, beneficial manner, but we really need to add more to STEM. I always say, let's call it a STEAM, and add ethics and empathy. And empathy is something that only comes from humans, face to face. So,
Joanna, Tom, Jenny, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm Brian Stillman. I'm with BeTerrific. We're here at CES 2020, coming to you live from Las Vegas, Nevada, all week. This is it. This is what CES is all about. This amazing applications of technology to help people to make our lives better. Stick around. We'll have a lot more coverage coming your way.